This day is brought to you by Progressive. Are you driving your car or doing laundry right now? Podcasts go best when they're bundled with another activity, kind of like Progressive home and auto policies. They're best when bundled too. Having those two policies together makes insurance easier and could help you save. Customers who save by switching their home and car insurance to Progressive save nearly $800 on average. Quote a home and car bundle today at Progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. National average 12-month savings of $793 by new customers surveyed who saved with Progressive between June 2021 and May 2022. Potential savings will vary. Hello and welcome to This Day in Esoteric Political History from Radiotopia. My name is Jody Avirgan. This day, January 1811, it is the immediate aftermath of what came to be known as the German Coast Uprising, a revolt by enslaved people in parts of the territory of Orleans in the first week of January 1811. This took place in the parishes just outside of New Orleans, largely on these enormous sugar plantations that had grown up in the previous decades around New Orleans. And like any story that features New Orleans, this one is a truly fascinating mix of different cultures and forces of history all colliding in this one epic moment. Not to mention a truly remarkable figure who we haven't talked about on this show, Charles Deslondes, an enslaved man who led the revolution. So let's talk about 1811, Charles Deslondes, one of America's largest and largely forgotten slave revolts. Here, as always, Nicole Hammer of Vanderbilt and Kellie Carter-Jackson of Wellesley. Hello there.
Hello, Jody.
Hey there.
So a few little tidbits before we jump in, but we're going to go with Deslondes as the pronunciation here. If you were saying this in Spanish, and this will tell you how it's spelled, but you'd say Deslondes. But, you know, I think Deslondes, there's actually a band from New Orleans that I really love called the Deslondes, spelled this way. And shout out to them, one of my favorite bands. And also, I will say, I think people on this show probably have picked up on my love of New Orleans, probably my favorite city in the country other than New York. But in many ways, because I think it just embodies and lives so much of its history and culture, and so many mixes are just right there and present, and you can see it. And this story feels like such a New Orleans story in that way. It's an American story, it's a Caribbean story, it's a French story. And I think maybe we start in the Caribbean, right? Because it feels like the Haitian Revolution is the big setup to this whole story. So you want to set that context, or where do you want to start?
Yeah, this is a story I talk about in Force and Freedom, where you think about the end of the Haitian Revolution, 1803, 1804, and what it has done. It's set off shockwaves all across the Caribbean and even into the United States, and even in some parts of South America. People are hearing about this successful rebellion and the overthrow of the French Empire in this small, tiny little island, and they're thinking about these sort of great Haitian revolutionary leaders like Henry Christophe and Toussaint Louverture and so forth. And they're inspired by this. And so all throughout the Caribbean, you have these little sort of spin-off rebellions that happen in Cuba and that happen in Jamaica. And the United States is actually no exception. So when people hear about this revolution, they start to plot for themselves what might be possible. Maybe the Haitian Revolution is possible in the United States. And so people are picking up these revolutionary ideals. It's not too long after the heels of the American Revolution where these ideas of sort of liberty and equality and freedom are all still very much percolating throughout the nation. And, now at this point, this entire territory is the United States. France, when it loses its battle through the Haitian Revolution in order to sort of save money, sells this big plot of land to Thomas Jefferson, some would say for a steal or a deal, which is the Louisiana Purchase. And so the United States really doubles its territory almost overnight. But again, those feelings of rebellion and freedom are still very much in the hearts and minds of enslaved people who live in Louisiana. And that's sort of the context for how this pops off.
And you have all of this revolutionary fervor meeting a particularly harsh form of enslavement. This is sugarcane, and where people are being driven much longer hours and much harsher conditions, and lifespans are much shorter. And that really does breed revolution, right? You're upping discontent and the sense that things cannot remain this way, with, the French declarations of the rights of men and the Declaration of Independence and stories coming in newspapers from Haiti. And all of that is circulating together. And that's how I think you get the conditions for this revolution.
One other material fallout of the Haitian Revolution, though, is also that a lot of plantations moved up to Louisiana after that. So I mean, the sort of irony of this story is that the enslaved population and the level of cruelty and the sort of size of plantations grew in the wake of the Haitian Revolution in this era, which then sets the stage for this revolution being so massive.
With the loss of Haiti, because it was the leader in sugar production, now all these other spaces have to sort of pick up the slack that Haiti supplied. And so a place like Louisiana that might have only sort of planted sugar cane, maybe in small dosages, is now like having to expand, 3 or 4 or 5-fold because of all of the fallout with Haiti.
NIki hinted at it a little bit, and I don't know if you know, but is there anything particular about sugar plantations that differentiate it from the other kinds of plantations in terms of the quality or the systems or the
Well, sugar
farming?
is a 24/7, 365 crop. So it's not something where you have lulls or down seasons. And it's also, it's not just the cutting of the cane, but the processing of the sugar cane that's really dangerous. So you have these really big, hot kennels in which you have to, cook the sugar, and people lose their lives, they lose limbs. It is a brutal process in terms of making sugar cane. And so exactly what NIki was saying is just people are at their extremes in trying to reach production or maintain production. It's humanly impossible to do that.
And it's in these conditions that Charles Deslondes is working as a driver. This is often a figure that you'll read about in literature about slavery. An enslaved person who's also the overseer of the work, and could become like a pretty feared figure in people's lives. So I think in some ways it's kind of an unlikely position from which a revolt is going to come. Although, Kellie, maybe you can correct me on that. But that's his position on this, in this case, on the plantation of a colonel known as Manuel Andre, who has 86 slaves. And Deslondes is inspired by the Haitian Revolution, and he begins to organize a revolt against his enslavers and the other enslavers in the region.
You're used to hearing my voice on the world, bringing you interviews from around the globe.
And you hear me reporting environment and climate news. I'm Carolyn Beeler.
And I'm Marco Werman. We're now with you hosting The World Together. More global journalism with a fresh new sound.
Listen to The World on your local public radio station and wherever you find your podcasts.
And it's brutal. I mean, they attack their slaveholder, they kill the son, and then they do something that makes this revolution or rebellion very interesting, is that they put on the military uniforms of French soldiers as a way to sort of be official and inspire. And then it starts to snowball. Like, they are literally going from plantation to plantation, setting plantations on fire, just like they did in the Haitian Revolution, killing their enslavers, men, women, and children. And as this rebellion builds, more people join, more people see sort of the success of it, which makes it one of the largest slave rebellions. I mean, the numbers aren't clear, but anywhere from 300 to 500 people are involved.
Can you put that in context when you say that's one of the largest rebellions? Others mostly.
If you think about Nat Turner's rebellion, dozens might have been involved. If you think about Gabriel Prosser's rebellion, I mean, it's kind of just Gabriel because it's a rumor, but then the fallout is worse than the amount of people that actually participated. But most rebellions get stopped, before they can really get started or really catch momentum. And so you don't have a lot of people that can sort of buy in and allow it to keep going. The Stono Rebellion gets some momentum, but unfortunately, through like a twist of fate, as they're marching on their campaign, they get stopped by or met by a militia group. And so that sort of cuts the rebellion short. But there's no one sort of stopping this rebellion initially. So it allows it to get a lot of groundswell. And, people are trying to run away. People are trying to put out the fires on their plantation. Like, people are sort of unclear as what's going on because they're seeing enslaved people in uniforms on horseback. I mean, everything is disorienting about what is happening. The enslaved population is quite large in that area as well. So it's not, if this were Kentucky, would be different. Kentucky is a slave state, but it doesn't have these like massive plantations with 500 people or 200 people. Most plantations were like you had 3 slaves or 6 slaves or 12. But 96 enslaved people is a lot of enslaved people. It's way more than the average planter would have. The average planter has maybe 20 enslaved people. So if you have 96, 100, 100 plus, not only are you incredibly wealthy, but you're also incredibly vulnerable to these kinds of acts of rebellion.
And it does take a few days for the plantation owners and the militia to organize to try to stop this rebellion. I mean, one of the most remarkable things about it is how long that it lasts and how many people join it. And it takes, until January 11th or 12th. The rebellion started, I think, on January 8th, before they finally marshal enough troops to try to capture and ultimately, as we'll talk about, kill the people who are involved in the rebellion. And that happens in the early morning of January 12th, when the white militia finally catches up with Charles Deslondes. He's killed in a pretty grotesque manner at that point, as are dozens of others in the days and weeks that followed.
Yeah, and then there's interrogation and torture and then execution. 44 people are, I think, decapitated. Heads are put on spikes. I mean, it doesn't seem like there's a legal process that kicks in once these folks are arrested.
If anyone has ever been to the Whitney Plantation just outside New Orleans, which I highly recommend, it's a really, really powerful experience. They talk about this rebellion, and they talk about the sort of the highway or the road that you drive on to go to that plantation, that you would see heads on spikes, like almost like road markers. And it seems barbaric because it is.
It is, yeah.
But this is something that happened in America. I think oftentimes we think that's something that happens elsewhere. But in America, that was what was part of the deterrent, is to sort of make the violence even worse than what had been experienced, to keep anyone else from getting inspired to want to commit a rebellion again.
So as we wrap up, I think you hinted at this earlier, Kellie, but it's like, this is the biggest and least known slave revolt in U.S. history. And why is this not live in the public imagination the way that Nat Turner's rebellion certainly does? Or maybe did this inspire other rebellions at the time? And put this in some of that context.
I think there's a couple of reasons why it doesn't sort of take off in the way that we would expect. I think part of that is because it's in New Orleans, and at the time, New Orleans was still new to the nation, new to America, if you will. And when you think about Nat Turner's rebellion, it happens in Virginia, and Virginia is sort of like the capital of the South in a lot of ways. And Nat Turner's rebellion has the highest number of white casualties. And I think that is also what's remembered more, the fact that more white people were killed than in Deslondes' rebellion. And I think that, these histories are hard and often first suppressed. When you hear a story like this, it's not something, there's not going to be the Deslondes holiday. There will be no Deslondes holiday. But I think that, if we were to give this a second look, a much harder look, he's not acting any differently than sort of the revolutionary fathers were. He's thinking about liberty and freedom, and he was sort of declared himself a soldier and was acting in the same way that soldiers would when they're engaged in war. So he was trying to be strategic. I mean, there's a lot that you could say about this that was somewhat praiseworthy, but obviously because the institution of slavery was so violent, no one was going to look at it in that way. It's not until a Harvard student by the name of Daniel Rasmussen, he writes his senior thesis about it at Harvard, and it later becomes a book. But I wish more people would check out the book. It's a really fascinating book, but it gives sort of this history and sort of why it's been so suppressed.
And that book was just 10, 15 years ago, right? I mean, not that long
American
ago.
Uprising is the name of the untold story of America's largest slave revolt.
So, there's that book. There's a band that I love. There's this podcast.
There's Force and Freedom and the forthcoming book, We Refuse.
Yes.
And I think I read that there's also some reenactments have been starting to take place each year, which is
I heard
really
about
interesting.
that
And we have
too.
Civil War reenactments. Why not reenactments of this? So, it is maybe working its way a little bit back into the public memory. So we will leave it there. Really fascinating, and I'm glad we got to this one. But Nicole Hemmer, thanks to you as always.
Thank you, Jody.
And Kellie Carter-Jackson, thanks to you.
My pleasure.
Support for This Day in Esoteric Political History comes from Odoo. If you feel like you're wasting time and money with your current business software, or just want to know what you could be missing, then you'll need to join the millions of others who have switched to Odoo. Odoo is the affordable, all-in-one management software with a library of fully integrated business applications that help you get more done in less time for a fraction of the price. To learn more, visit odoo.com/thisday. That's odoo.com/thisday. Odoo, modern management made simple.
Radiotopia from PRX.